Okay, so we have our flutes shaped and sanded, and we're getting ready to tune them. Ideally, we want our work environment to be at around 72 degrees. And we want to have some kind of ventilation. I'm not going to use ventilation for this video because it will be too noisy, but if you have a dust collection system in your shop, you can set up by one of your dust ports. You may have to turn it off every time you test the flute and if it interferes with your tuner. But this is a fairly smoky process, so it's a good idea to have some kind of ventilation. You will need your flute, the little flat block that comes with it, a rubber band to attach that, the metal files that we used earlier, a sanding rod, a tuner, whatever implement you're using for enlarging the fingering holes. I'm going to use a Dremel. And your booklet with the last page open that has the fingering chart, which we are going to use to reference what notes we're trying to tune the flute to. Also, you will need hearing protectors, if I didn't say that already. The Dremel makes a very loud noise, so we want to have hearing protectors on so that we can protect our hearing. Another thing that is good to have, but not 100% necessary, is some kind of, I love this Starbond super glue for filling back in holes that have been made too large. So we're going to try not to do that, but it happens. So if you mess your flute up, we'll go over how to use the super glue and an accelerator to make your holes smaller again. And I'll talk about some other methods for filling back in fingering holes that have been made too large. Another thing that I need to run and grab is a something flat to sand the deck of the flute on. I like using a piece of laminate flooring, but you can use something like a cutting board or something that's very perfectly flat, and a sheet of 220 grit sandpaper laid on top of that. I'm going to go grab that really quick and I will be right back. Okay, so as I said earlier, something perfectly flat because we want to make sure that we don't bevel the deck or scratch the deck of the flute at all. So to begin, I'm just going to make sure that the deck of the flute is perfectly flat. I'll just demonstrate. I've already done it on that one, but I'll demonstrate on this one. So you put your 220 grit sandpaper on your flat surface. Make sure there is no grit on your flute. Make sure your sandpaper is also clean. And we're going to hold the flute down and just do a couple strokes. Check, you can kind of shine the light across this to check and make sure that it is perfectly flat. And it is. So now that that's done, I'm going to get this out of my way. You can also sand the bore of the flute. We did that a little bit in the last step, but it's a good idea to make sure that that is perfectly sanded. And this one is totally smooth on the inside, so we're good to go. All right, we have our block on, and now we're going to see whether the fundamental note, which is the lowest note, all holes covered, will play. This usually has to be adjusted a little bit. What you'll hear is a really jumpy, unstable note. This one's actually pretty good. That's what we're commonly going to hear. That means that the fipple hole needs to be lengthened and smoothed a little bit. So take one of the files that you were working with earlier, and we're going to use the same method that we used in the earlier video to sand. We're going to lengthen this very tiny amount. You really do not want to over lengthen this or you'll get a breathy voice. but we are going to sand with a downward stroke, and then we're going to clean up underneath. We're going to shine a light in there and make sure that there isn't any debris. I'm going to re-angle the flute so that I can undersand that. And I'm going to take my smaller file and I'm going to feel the sidewalls of the flute. I'm not really sanding. I'm just feeling to make sure that there's no rough edges there. That looks pretty good. Let's look up inside the flute. I don't see anything. You can shine a light through the fifth bowl or angle it so that you can see light through the fifth bowl, and that will help you to see if there's any debris, like a little burr of wood hanging down inside of the flute. Put your block on and test the note again. So that's what I'm looking for. I want a stable note where I can apply a little bit more air pressure and the note isn't jumping up. At this stage of the flute, it's not going to sound super good. It's going to sound a little bit raspy, and that's normal, but we do want to be able to hold that low note without having it jump up an octave. So I'm happy with that. Let's move our files aside and get ready to tune. I have my tuner here, and I have my hearing protectors. The Dremel tool is really loud, so it's good to wear hearing protectors while you're working with that. And my fingering chart. I'm tuning this flute to the key of G, so I'm going to be tuning. Briefly, I'll tell you, I will enlarge the 4 direction holes to tune this note. Then I will lift a finger and I will enlarge that hole to tune the note. So for a G, it's going to be G, A sharp, C sharp, D. Then we do lift this finger off. That'll be an E. And then we put that finger back down and lift this finger off. That will be an F. And then that finger off will be a G, but we are leaving that down. But we do have to tune that hole when we come up to it. And then we put that finger back down and tune the next hole like this, just to clarify. Okay, so I'm going to put my hearing protectors on and we're going to start enlarging those holes. We want to hold the flute. To begin, I'm going to hold the flute like this, and I am going to try to come in at a fairly straight angle with the Dremel tool. We're going to incrementally enlarge these, play it for the tuner, see where it's at, and it probably enlarge them more. Make sure your tuner's on. I should also say that it is totally normal for your flute to register on the tuner very flat at this stage. So don't be worried if you put the block on your flute and it's playing some really weird note. Let's see, this is drilled to the key of G. And it's registering a little bit flat. This one is actually not going to need very much enlarging here, but oftentimes when you play it for the tuner, it'll be quite flat, and that's totally normal. So let's just enlarge.
I'm just going to enlarge the 4 direction holes a little bit.
And give it a test. I'm going to go just a little bit more with the perfect. That is exactly where I want it to be registering. So I'm ready to move on to the next hole, which is this hole. Here we go. That's super flat. So I'm getting... That's supposed to be a G, and I'm getting an A. So it's way, way flat. So let's enlarge that one. Ooh, we're getting close. Let me see. Really flat. So the next note in the G scale. Oh yeah, I meant to say that's supposed to be an A sharp. I'm just confusing myself here. I like to play through the scale and test each note again as I go along. Periodically, something you do up here will change the tuning that's already been done. Where its tuning is just a very complicated thing, but try not to get frustrated. You sometimes will see your tuner jump around. If your tuner seems to be doing something funny, like you're listening to the note, it sounds in tune to you, but your tuner is registering way off, stop playing for a minute, let it stop registering, and then play again. And a lot of times you'll get a different note. It's one of the frustrating things about tuning.
I am tuning the A sharp just a little bit sharper.
That's perfect. Next note is C. So we've got a very, very flat C.
My tuner was jumping all over the place.
That's right. And the next note is going to be a D. And you hear how flat that is. Just go a little bit at a time. It's so much easier to make the holes bigger than it is to make them smaller. It's coming up.
The note is coming up. Just do a little bit at a time.
Remember to readjust your block each time, especially if you're using a Dremel, because it rattles the block out of alignment. That's perfect. The next note is this funny one. So this is that hole you always leave down. We're going to open it and tune that note. And that's going to be an E. Normally we tune in an area that has a ventilation, but it's not a convenient area to film, so that's why I'm standing in this cloud of smoke. I need that E to be a little bigger. Little tiny bit more. That's perfect, so let's listen. And the next note is, I'm going to put a finger back down on that hole. It's the only one that you tune like that, so that gets covered again. And now we're going to tune the F note. That's coming up to pitch. Periodically, you can sand the inside of the flute. To make sure that there's no burrs sticking down into the flute. This does kick a lot of debris down into the flute, so it's a good idea, particularly if you're getting a really funny reading on your tuner, to just sand that really quick and also check your block and make sure that everything is in alignment. That needs to come up a little bit.
This note is still flat, so it needs to be enlarged a little bit more.
Oh, that's perfect. That's spot on. Okay, and then our top note is the key of G. So that's with that hole covered and that hole open. These two holes open, I should say. So let's enlarge that. That's really good. Okay, so briefly, we're going to go up the scale and listen to it. I can actually hear pretty well with my hearing protectors on. Let's take them off and I'll stop shouting. Then we can do an overblow note by covering all of these and blowing harder and comparing the overblow to the high note. They are perfectly in tune. So this flute is tuned. I also want to go over a couple of the problems that can crop up and how to fix them really briefly. So let's, this is a junker flute. If somebody badly messed this fingering hole up, I don't even know how that happened, but I'm gonna wreck this flute so I can fix it. Okay. Oops, I made that hole too big. So what do you do when you are playing it for the tuner and the note is too sharp? That means you drilled the hole too big. And that's a harder problem to fix because you have to make it smaller again. That's where our super glue is going to come into play. And again, I use, this is Starbond thick gap gap filling super glue. I am not sponsored by Starbond. And I also have their accelerator. So this is a really, really crucial thing to own if you're going to make more than one flute. It's not terribly expensive, and this is a nice, I think they're a USA-based company. If you're a woodworker, also, this is such good stuff to have because you can fill in knot holes, you can fill in cracks, it's wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this nice little applicator and I'm going to fill in on the sides of the hole. This is a kind of a tricky process and you might get goop all over the place, but let me squeeze over here by the camera. Okay, so I'm just running a bead of glue around the hole. Oh, can you see I'm making a mess already? But we have sandpaper, that's what sandpaper's for. You can also wipe off the glue if it gets on the front of the flute. I kind of like to hold it down like this. Accelerator dries the glue really fast. So I've effectively made this fingering hole smaller again. And you can test it, and if it's still too sharp, you can add a little bit more, fill it in, spritz it, test it again. And then it is okay to enlarge it again if you make it too small, but you do want to be careful not to breathe in the fumes from that because it will really irritate your lungs. So that's how you make a hole smaller again. What if a hole is really big already? Like, what if you've gone all the way through with your Dremel and that hole is still needing to be enlarged more? Well, we use a technique where we call it underburning, and we burn the inside of the flute so that the hole on the surface remains the same size, but we're effectively making the hole larger. I'm going to demonstrate how to do that.
This technique is a little bit hard to demonstrate in a video, but I'll give it a shot. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to put the Dremel bit while it's running through the hole, and then you're going to angle it to the side to carve the inside of the hole larger while the outside stays the same. Make sure not to run the collet, the part that the bit chucks into the outside of the flute, or you'll leave big black marks that are hard to get rid of.
I'd show you, but you can't see it. Effectively, what we've done is we've enlarged the hole from the inside without making the fingering hole larger, which is a really nice way to cosmetically fix when you have a hole that's really wanting to be a giant hole on the flute, and you want to be able to cover it with your fingers still. So those are a couple of tricks, and tuning is a really challenging thing. So if you're having some random issue happen while you're trying to tune your flute and you have tried everything in the book and you've watched this video and you're not sure what's going on, email us. We have quite an extensive knowledge of all the random little weird things that happen when you try to tune a flute. So now that our flute is tuned, we're going to move on to the next part of the process, which is one more quick sand, and then we're going to varnish the flute.